Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. Today, let's talk about burgers. No, not those kind of burgers, not the have it your way burgers or I'm loving it burgers. I mean burgers with an H, Burghers. It means a prominent or a wealthy citizen. And perhaps the word most famously has been used for the Burghers of Calais, who were 6 very wealthy merchants, businessmen, and also local officials in the town of Calais during the 14th century. And it was during the 100 Years' War, and called the 100 Years' War because it lasted for 100 years. I mean, it was just continually this war, these battles, this conflicts was going on between England and France. And Edward III, the King of England, was besieging Calais, and he'd been besieging it for 1 year. There had been loss of life on both sides, and now Calais was in a bad way. Food supplies were used up, people were starving and dying in the city. And so these burghers, these 6 prominent merchantmen and officials in the city of Calais, they tried to negotiate a surrender with Edward III. Now, you've got to understand that back in those days, war was a bloodthirsty business. I know it is now, but there was no Geneva Convention. There were no rules of war. And while if a city just basically surrendered straight away without resisting, they could often expect mercy and clemency from the invader, if they fought and resisted and then were either captured or eventually surrendered, they could expect wholesale slaughter to take place. And at the very best they could hope for was that the civilian population might be spared, but all of those men of military age within the city would be put to death whenever a city surrendered or was captured. So these 6 prominent citizens, the burghers, they looked at the fact that with starvation and everything else, the entire population of Calais was going to die. And so they went out and negotiated with King Edward III. And eventually they reached an agreement that they would die. The 6 burghers who had negotiated surrender would die, but the lives of everybody else in the city would be spared. And so that was the agreement. And so the king stipulated that they had to come out dressed in sackcloth with their nooses of rope tied around their necks, all ready to be strung up on the gallows. And that in order to for this surrender and for the mercy or clemency it'd be allowed for the rest of the population of Calais to live, these 6 men had to come out, proceed out of the city and kneel down in front of the king in surrender and then be executed. And so these 6 prominent citizens came forth from the city gates of Calais, total silence, Edward III and all his army watching, all the people of Calais up on the walls watching these 6 men that were going to lay down their lives for them. They had the sackcloth robes on, they had the nooses around their necks, and they went and they knelt at the feet of the king. And then the queen, the king's queen, his wife, who was pregnant, began to intercede for them and asked her husband to spare them. And amazingly, it was pretty well unheard of in warfare at the time, the king granted the request of his wife. And those 6 men were not executed after all. Their lives were spared, and the lives of the people of an entire city were spared as well. You know, without even knowing that last twist in the story, it's still an inspiring story. Even if they had laid down their lives and being executed, it's still a prominent story. Jesus said, "Greater love has no one than this, that one should lay down his life for his friends." And I've spoken before about how sometimes we've taken that and totally misused that verse and applied it to soldiers who kill as many of the enemy as possible for the sake of their friends. But the true example, other than Jesus himself, of that being worked out is these 6 burghers of Calais coming and kneeling at the feet of the enemy king, knowing that they were giving up their lives in order to save the lives of everybody else in the town. You know what that shows me? shows me that we're made in the image of God. That God has created created us with this wonderful capacity for nobility, for good, to almost approach the divine in our love for others. Now, often that's masked, that's hidden because of the fall. It's hidden under sin. It's hidden under selfishness. And so we have many more examples of people that will do anything to save their skin. But just sometimes, the image of God in us can shine right through and show the people that we were really meant to be. And the glorious truth, of course, is that in Jesus Christ, we can become that person. And the courage that those 7 burghers of Calais showed, it's not just some unique thing in history, but it can actually be an example of the kind of people we really are when Jesus touches our lives. I pray that Christ will continue to shape your life and my life. And join us again tomorrow for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.